Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome along to Donington Park for what will be coming up. Will be round 12 of the Monoposto Racing Championship. We saw a great race from them yesterday, where Dan Gore, who has already secured the Mono 1000 category, went on to claim overall victory from Chris Davidson, who claimed top honours in the F3 category, but finished second overall. And Jason Timms made it three different class winners inside the top three as he went to victory lane in third position overall, but picked up the Mono 1400 class win. This is the penultimate race of the season that's coming up. We've got a further race, the final championship round, coming up later on over the course of the day, but it's a very, very full and a very busy grid as well. So much so is that we can't accommodate everybody on the grid at Donington Park on the Grand Prix circuit this weekend. We can start a maximum of 36 cars, which means we have 3 reserves, and you can see those cars queued up in the pit lane, ready to go should any of their fellow competitors have problems over the course of the formation lap, or should we get a race stop in the early stages of the race, then potentially those cars queued up in the pit lane could slot in to fill up the grid slot. So it's a fantastic position for the Monoposto Racing Club to be in, who have been providing some excellent value for money single-seater racing for a number of years, and as I mentioned yesterday, it certainly gives a home to some of the older cars that maybe have become obsolete from the championships that they were first ever built for. But the Monoposto Racing Club gives a home to pretty much almost any single-seater you can get your hands on, providing it meets the championship regulations, or if you're one of those very clever engineers and you wish to build your own car, and we've seen a few people do those in the past, then you can build your own car and compete in it, again providing it meets the generic championship regulations. So it's largely Formula 3 cars out there. Some of those might have been converted to run on motorcycle engines. We see a mix of Formula 4s, both 1600s and 2000s. We see the Formula Jedis out there as well. We've got a Formula Renault on the grid as well. So there's a range of different chassis that you can do, and subject to either the engine that's in them or the age of the chassis or which formula it was built for, dictate as to which one of the 7 different classes that you can pop your way into. We were blessed with fantastic weather conditions at Donington yesterday. It felt more like summer than autumn. We're back to autumn today, I'm afraid to say. It's been changeable weather over the course of this morning. The cars are lined up on the grid for what is going to be, for the Monoposto Racing Club, a rolling start. We saw rolling starts for all them yesterday, so the cars are there on the grid. The last couple of cars just trickling their way around and into position at the tail end of the field now. Brolly's still up, but I don't think it is raining at the moment. I think the rain cloud, the last one that we've had, has just passed over, and you can see there's very little wind in the background. You can see the flag hardly moving at all. It's down on the flagpole, so any rain that comes over is likely to stay for a while, because it's not going to sort of blow away very quickly, I'm afraid. And as you can see, not only the flags aren't moving, but the wind turbines, the wind generators aren't moving in the distance either. So a very, very still day here, as it was yesterday, to be fair. There was very little wind here yesterday, but it was warmer ambient conditions and sunshine. So the car's heading off onto the formation lap. Let's guide you through the grid. So we will see, starting from pole position, it is Dan Gore, the number 80 car, that starts from pole position. And alongside, it will be Jason Timms. Row 2 of the grid is Chris Davidson and Anthony Gauntlet, and row 3 of the grid sees Chris Woodhouse line up alongside Lee Fern. The 4th row of the grid is Neil Harrison and Martin Wright, with row 5 being Robin Dorr in the unusual Tom's Toyota alongside James Lederman. The 6th row of the grid, Miles Castaldini lines up alongside. It will be Bryn Tootle that will sit there on the outside of the 6th row of the grid, and row 7 sees Carl O'Brien at the wheel of the Leastone. He had a great drive through the order yesterday, line up alongside Terry Clark. James Rimmer has for company Chris Baldwin on row number 8, and row 9 is where we see Nigel Davers, and he lines up alongside Russ Giles. The 10th row of the grid, Morgan McCourt sits there on the 10th row of the grid. I can already hear squeals of tyres and a potential spin in the background. He has got Declan Wright for company, and onto row number 11, that's where we'll see Simon Tate and James Tanser. Row number 12 is Bruno Costa in the JKS, sitting alongside Jared Wood at the wheel of his Formula Vauxhall Lotus, and row 13 is Robert Smith and Tom Wheatley. The 14th row of the grid sees the Formula Renault in the field of Juan Moreno, lining up alongside Will McAtee, who had a spin at turn number 1 yesterday, but other than that had a good drive back through the field. And row 15 is Phil Davis and Chris Levy with his Formula Ford 2000 Van Diemen RF83. The 16th row of the grid is Sam Don and Peter Whitmore. The penultimate row of the grid, which is row number 17, sees Jeff Furman, a multiple champion in Monoposto racing, line up alongside, it will be Rodney Toff that will sit there in 34th position. And the final row of the grid is Davy Jones. Let's see what he's got in his locker from 35th on the grid, and alongside his number 66, which is Darren Richards rather. So that gives you the full grid, full 36 cars on the grid for this one. And as we say, 3 cars still waiting patiently in the pit lane. They did not get their entries in time, and therefore they are classified as reserves, and will have to keep their fingers crossed that misfortune falls upon fellow competitors if they're able to take part in this race. There is a further race to come, so maybe if any cars are damaged in this one and not able to be repaired, they might be able to get a race later on. But 3 cars that we can't accommodate on what is a very, very full grid. And for this weekend, we have got all the Monoposto classes racing together. That is not necessarily always the case. There's the unusual Tom's Toyota. Not many Tom's Formula 3 cars were built, really. And as you can see, Robin Dorr has opted for wet tyres on his car. Not everybody has, so we've got a mixture of wet tyres and slick tyres in there. And I think if I were on wet tyres, I think I'd be slightly concerned at the moment, because looking at the track surface and also looking out of the commentary box window, I think wet tyres are going to be overheating very, very quickly. But I can't see what rain clouds might be blowing in from my position. It looks grey, but look at the track there. You know, it's dry on the racing line, isn't it, as the cars come down? So I think poor old Robin Dorr, he might have chosen the wet tyres that are available to these drivers, but the number 28 car I think might struggle unless there's a change of conditions, because it looks sort of more slightly damp, a little bit greasy for sure on the first few laps. But again, down through the Craner curves, again you can see there is a fully dry line all the way down through the Craner curves. But in defence of anybody that's out there on wets, including the pole sitter, which is Dan Gore, they'd have gone to the assembly area the best parts of 20 minutes ago, and the assembly area where cars don't circulate particularly will look wet. The track itself, where there's a bit more breeze, it's a bit more exposed. There's been other cars circulating in some of the support races that are on the programme here. The drivers and the teams aren't to know exactly what the track conditions are like, so it is a bit of a roll of the dice, really. And as we say, you know, there could be another rain cloud blowing in. So it may well be that the wets are the way to go and the slicks aren't. Who will know? Well, we'll only know ourselves over the course of the next 15 minutes or so, because that is how long this race is scheduled for. The 12th round of the Monoposto Championship. They conclude their season here. All of the other previous rounds have been double header events, so they started their championship season here at Donington Park, but that was on the national circuit on the 10th and the 11th of April. Then they moved on to Brands Hatch on the Grand Prix circuit on the 8th and 9th of May, down to Castle Combe in Wiltshire for what was the next weekend of racing, and that took place in mid-part of June, the 12th and the 13th of June, and Alton Park in Cheshire on the 24th of July for what was scheduled to be 2 races. Some of the classes, they were split that weekend. They had separate grids for the different classes. Some classes got 2 races, others only got 1 because of an on-track incident in a separate championship which delayed the proceedings. And then after that, last time out, all the classes were amalgamated again on the 14th and 15th of October at Silverstone on the Grand Prix circuit there for the previous rounds coming into this weekend. So we had the race yesterday, which was secured by Dan Gore. Dan Gore will start from pole position. Chris Davidson, who finished second in yesterday's race, actually starts third on the grid for this one. His is the sort of grey car with the Dayglow nose and side pods and nose cone to it. Chris Davidson. And Jason Timms, who lines up on the outside of the front row of the grid. His is the dark blue and white machine, Dallara chassis, but motorcycle engine that sits in the back of it. He finished third in yesterday's race, but starts on the front row for today. This grid is formed based on the fastest lap times that were posted in yesterday's race. So it's not second fastest times, it's not results from yesterday, it's fastest lap times from yesterday's race 1 that give us this grid for the second race of the weekend, is the way the regulations are written. So we're about to get the penultimate race of the season underway for the Monoposto Championship. Dan Gore in the Jedi, the black car on pole position. Alongside is Jason Timms at the wheel of his number 3 Dallara. The red lights are on the gantry, and we're about to go racing for the penultimate time this season in the Monoposto Championship. Some cars on wet, some cars on slicks. Dan Gore is away and leading the race. A big wiggle from Jason Timms as he tried to get the power down, but Chris Davidson has already taken second place away from him, and it looks as though also sneaking through may well be Neil Harrison, who's had a really good start at the wheel of the number 10 Dallara. A spin for Robin Dorr in the middle of the pack. He reverses the car almost out of harm's way. You can see just how wet the grass is there, but for Robin Dorr that has split the pack really, and already the front 3 cars are sprinting away. Dan Gore leads, Chris Davidson second, Neil Harrison in third position, and fourth place, I think it's Chris Woodhouse that's there in fourth place at the wheel of his Dallara, but everybody is treading very gingerly down through the old hairpin and the Craner curves. I think it's still wet and greasy out there, and of course the tyres at this stage still not fully up to temperature, so you need to just bed things in over the course of the first couple of laps, and I'm afraid Robin Dora's out of the race. He's probably lost the engine on the Tom's Toyota, and that's an enormous shame for Robin, who lined up 9th on the grid, and in yesterday's race finished inside the top 10. He was in 10th position in yesterday's race. Car is undamaged though, so hopefully we'll see him back out for the final race of the season later on today. So the car's threading their way through Coppice Corner at the tail end of the field. At the front end of the field, Dan Gore heads down in towards the braking area for the Melbourne hairpin for the first time. Runs a little bit wide mid-corner there, but has enough of a gap between himself and Chris Davidson so as not to worry. Neil Harrison is there in third place. Fourth place is going to be Chris Woodhouse, and it looks like it's Miles Castledini that's there in fourth place. Jason Timms, who started on the front row of the grid, is rather going backwards at the moment. You can see how much he's struggling in these conditions to apply the power, and I think he is on the slick tyres by the look of things. He just can't get the power down, so it's probably greasier out there than the cameras are tending to show at this stage. Looks like it's almost a dry track, doesn't it? But grip seems to be at a premium at the moment. Chris Woodhouse, number 4, moving around to try and attack Mark Harrison. There's a spin for Martin Wright as well. Now, he started 8th on the grid, and he's on wet tyres, and he's had a problem as well. So I think everybody in general is just struggling with the conditions. Just that stage, I think, that racing drivers hate. They either like it fully dry or they like it fully wet. Well, to the eye, the circuit looks pretty much dry, but clearly the conditions are just that greasy and horrible, and everybody's feeling their way round and trying to work out exactly where the grip is, or in some cases isn't. Simon Tate diving through. That's up the inside of James Rimmer there. Simon had problems in yesterday's race and ultimately retired just 4 laps in. Had been going really well before the problems befell him. Nice to see that number 15 Dallara back out again and working his way through the order. And with Simon Tate having done just a few laps yesterday, of course he didn't really get that much time to put in a quick lap, so he started 21st on the grid, and after the first lap was up to 16th position, so a great first lap from him. James Rimmer wheel to wheel with Nigel Davies. Nigel Davies allows the door to open up a little bit, and the next of the cars is perhaps going to squeeze his way through and past Nigel there. Yeah, now James Rimmer is under pressure from the next of the cars, looking to squeeze its way through. The number 29 car looking to dive through, gain the position, but he's going to lose out again to Nigel Davies as they head in towards the braking area for the chicane this time through. So James Tanser can't quite make it stick, but he will have another go this time, and has got the inside line as they come down in towards the Melbourne hairpin. Davies up the inside of James Rimmer, so Jedi passed very early Dallara Formula 3 car, and the number 29 car also in the hands of James Tanser squeezes his way through. So 2 places lost there for James Rimmer, I'm afraid, who had a brief trip through the gravel trap yesterday down at the old hairpin. So 15-minute race, 11 minutes still remaining. So full is the grid that everybody has got somebody to squabble with, really. Dan Gore in the lead of the race has just set the fastest lap of the race, 1 minute 40.033. And you can see the advantage that he's got now between himself and Chris Davidson. It's the distance between the exit of McLean's Corner and the approach towards Coppice Corner. You can see the car moving around there. You can just see the slide of the car as he was applying the power and just keeping the tail end in check. No real oversteer at all, but just letting the car drift its way out of the corner, onto the brakes and through the S's, where new curbs have been installed for this weekend. Lots of drivers have been cutting the corner there previously. New curbs have been installed, and I think for some of the drivers yesterday was very much a learning experience to realise how much curb you could take and how much you couldn't take, and I think a few of them have perhaps ended up with a little bit of damage to their cars, taking too much curb through those areas, but that's what they're designed for, to keep the drivers off them. So Gore leads by a second or so from Chris Davidson in second place. Further down through the order, some great squabbles going on at the moment up towards Coppice Corner. There goes Jared Wood. Will McAteer just sweeping across the nose of Declan Wright's car. So Declan Wright at the wheel of the number 71, the Gem. That's one of the self-built cars that we've got in the field. And now Will McAteer at the wheel of that white and multicolour car, looking to try and work his way further up through the order. A spin and recovering back onto track. That was the number 36 car, I think, that was the spinning and looking to try and work its way back onto the circuit there. as Russ Giles is now going wheel to wheel with Juan Moreno and puts the Dallara up the inside of the Formula Renault. As skittering off onto the wet grass goes Martin Wright, and in the background we've also had a spin as well for a couple of cars, and I think one of those is the number 12 car of Phil Davis. The other car I think might be Sam Don, possibly. The two Formula Fords that have had issues. Sam Don's the number 73 car. So 9 minutes to go. Will McAteer is the busiest on track at the moment. That number 23 car coming under pressure and should just hang on to the place still. Declan Wright at the wheel of the Gem. Then it's Terry Clark that is the next of those. But I'm afraid safety car is coming out. So SC boards illuminated. The marshals waving the yellow flags around the track. And that's probably because we've got this issue down at the old hairpin. And that is Sam Don's car that has had a problem. So Martin Wright went off. We saw the spin then for Phil Davis in the lighter blue Formula Ford. And I think some of the drivers at the moment haven't quite reacted to the safety car boards. So once the safety car comes out, there should be no overtaking. And I think there's a couple of the drivers that perhaps haven't quite worked out yet that the safety car is out there. So, of course, they're concentrating on the cars around them, not, as always, looking to spot the flags in their peripheral vision. And that's not, you know, a defence for them in that respect, but sometimes some drivers just do take a few more seconds to react to the safety car boards, and if there has been any overtaking, they'll realise that and they'll reshuffle their own order and hold their hands up to the fact that they've made a small error. But you know, when the safety car is out there, for the safety of any marshals that are working trackside, and we can't go racing without the marshals, we forever are indebted for everything that they do for us. You know, the safety car and the yellow flags mean no overtaking, because you could have marshals working trackside trying to clear up whatever has caused the problem, which we think is Sam Down's car. So it's just come to a halt down at the Melbourne hairpin, and for whatever reason can't get fired back up once more. So under safety car here with 7.5 minutes just under to go. Number 80 Dan Gore leads the race and leads the Mono 1000 class. In second place is number 31, which is Chris Davidson, who leads the Mono F3 class. In third place is another Mono F3 car, it's number 4 Chris Woodhouse, and fourth place it's another Mono 1000 car, which is number 78 Miles Castaldini. Anthony Gauntlet, number 20, is there in fifth at the moment, and sixth is number 10 Neil Harrison, who started well but just seems to have dropped back down through the order again a little bit more. Seventh place is the number 38 car, which is the least own of Carl O'Brien in seventh place. Eighth place is going to be number 40, which is Chris Baldwin, who started 16th on the grid up into 8th position. Ninth place is the Mono 2000 class leader, which is number 26, former champion Bryn Tootle, and completing the top 10 at the moment is the number 17 car, which is Bruno Costa. Now, he's come from 23rd on the grid, so he's another driver that's had a real good run through the order. Other class leaders that are not inside the top 10 at the moment, well, remember that Jason Timms started from the outside of the front row of the grid. Well, he's 14th now, but still leads the Mono 1400 class at the wheel of the number 3 car. So he leads his class, and the only other class leader we need to pick up on is currently down in 22nd position, and it's car number 23, and that is the white and multicoloured Reynard that harks back to 1992, so almost 20 years old now, that chassis, and that is Will McAteer at the wheel of the number 23 car, and that gives you not only the top 10, that has also picked out our relative class leaders in this penultimate round of the championship. There are still individual championships to be decided for the classes. Dan Gore has already secured the Mono 1000 class. Jeff Fern, prior to this weekend, had already secured the Mono 1600 class. Ben Stiles, who is not with us this weekend, had already secured the Mono 1800 class. And actually, if you looked across all of the classes, Ben Stiles was leading the championship overall, but it's really class champions that we look for in Monoposto. The others that are still to be decided, we're about to go green once more, a Mono F3, where Lee Fern is on 87 points and Neil Harrison is on 79, but we get the race back underway. There's no overtaking until they get to the start-finish line. 5 minutes remaining, and as they all work their way up towards Redgate Corner, there's lots of back marker lappery to be done here as Neil Harrison's looking to try and squeeze his way through past some of the slower traffic as he sits there in 6th position with the number 10 Dallara. He's got quite a bit of a gap between himself and the car behind her. He's looking to try and build a bit of a gap through the traffic, because that is the orange Leastone that would be behind him. So here they come down in towards the Melbourne hairpin now. There goes Anthony Gauntlet. There's Neil Harrison. There is then the Leastone, which is in the hands of O'Brien, Carl O'Brien. So where was Miles Castaldini? I didn't quite see where the number 78 car was on that shot. I wonder if Miles Castaldini's perhaps lost a position or two at the wheel of his Van Diemen RF94. Everybody else safely through the old hairpin. You can see the ever-drying line now, actually. So here comes the black and orange car towards us. That's Anthony Gauntlet. Then behind, it's Carl O'Brien that sits behind. So he has managed to get himself ahead of Neil Harrison. Through comes Simon Tate, sneaking up the inside of Chris Baldwin. Is he going to make it stick? Yes, he does. So another place gained by Simon Tate, who, as I say, the number 15 Dallara was going so well in yesterday's race. Well, that is now going to put him up into potentially something like 8th position, maybe. Coming back at him, though, is Chris Baldwin onto the brakes down at the Melbourne hairpin. So having gained the place, he's in danger of losing it again once more. But I think he's got the legs on the number 40 car as they head into the braking area for Goddard's this time through. And we've now only got 3 minutes of the race remaining. Very late on the brakes goes the number 17 car of Bruno Costa up the inside of Jason Timms, who's really struggling in this race. The number 3 car. So he started on the outside of the front row of the grid. He will power back past the JKS in a straight line, you can see in the background of his shot, but really hasn't gone to plan for the man that started on the front row of the grid and is now down outside of the top 10. So on to the top of Hollywood they go once more. Neil Harrison in 6th position, coming under pressure from the charging Simon Tate. The two Dallaras together. Oh, Simon Tate with a rear wheel just dropped onto the wet curb there, and that just unsettled the car as he went in towards the old hairpin. Just wagged its tail to a degree, the car, caught it with a small amount of correction to the steering input. But just going to show that Simon Tate is still pushing hard, having come from 21st on the grid, the number 15 car. The red, the white and the blue Dallara is now looking to try and haul itself inside the top 6. There is Jason Timms, who is leading. Right, there's Miles Castaldini. So that is what's happened to the number 78 car. So he did disappear. I did wonder where he'd gone. Hadn't seen him come through shot, but that answers the question. He's retired. I think that's on the run out of Starkey's Bridge where he's pulled the car off. But for 6th position, can Neil Harrison hang on to it is the big question. In towards the braking area for the Melbourne hairpin now come. Neil Harrison under attack from Simon Tate. Simon Tate is in that dichotomy. He wants to attack, but he's got to defend from Chris Baldwin. And now starting to come back at them all of a sudden is Jason Timms, who on his slick tyres, I think now, is starting to maybe feel as though the track conditions are heading towards his direction. The pendulum's swinging a little bit, but with only a couple of minutes to go, maybe slicks weren't quite the gamble that he thought they would be. I certainly thought slicks would be the way to go in this one, but the wet shod cars seem to have had the upper hand largely. There's Bryn Tootle. He's the last of the cars inside the top 10 at the moment, but the fight for 6th works its way down through the Craner curves now. Neil Harrison under attack from Simon Tate, but both getting caught by Jason Timms, who is now starting to reel them back in again once more. Now Jason Timms is, I think, going to secure, more than likely, the Mono 1400 Championship with this class win that is coming up here. Even if he gets past the 2 cars ahead, he won't gain any more championship points because the 2 cars ahead of him both run in Mono F3, whereas the number 3 car is a Mono 1400 car. Dallara chassis, they all are, but that one there has a Suzuki engine in the back, whereas the 2 cars ahead have road car based engines in the back. Now in the slipstream, can Simon Tate do anything about Neil Harrison? Jason Timms in a straight line with a slightly lighter car, I think might power his way past both of them, and Neil Harrison is going to lose 2 places in one there as he through goes Simon Tate, through goes Jason Timms, and Neil Harrison has to take to the grass in avoidance as a result of, I think, getting caught offline and braking a little bit later than ideally he wanted to do. Now Simon Tate brakes too late there, runs wide. Jason Timms easily picks him off. Then Simon Tate has a bit of movement on the exit of the corner and might lose the place back again to Neil Harrison. No, not quite. Now that is Anthony Gauntlet. Now he was in 5th position. He's had a spin coming out of Goddard's. So everybody that's going past now are gaining places by the look of things. He fires the Jedi back into life, but Gauntlet, who was, 5th position, now comes over the start-finish line in 11th, I'm afraid to say, as Neil Harrison looks to try and re-attack Simon Tate, who sweeps across the nose of the slightly newer Dallara. Can't quite make it stick there. Our race leader, though, is on the final lap at the moment, and Chris Davidson has gone through on this last lap and ahead of Dan Gore. Now, Davidson is on slick tyres. Dan Gore, we know, in fact, no, Davidson is on wet tyres as well. Dan Gore was on wets, but it looks as though the fastest lap of the race is now going the way of Chris Woodhouse in third position, a 1 minute 36.004. He's about 1.7 seconds quicker than the pair of cars ahead. And what tyre is Chris Woodhouse on? Because it's certainly, these conditions have made it very, very interesting. Wet would appear for the moment to have been the way to go, but had this been a 20-minute race rather than a 15, I think the slicks might have come in on their own, and Chris Woodhouse has very easily picked off Dan Gore there for second place, the number 4 Dallara, which is on slick tyres, you can see. Yeah, absolutely. So the slick tyres are now starting to work for everybody. That's why Chris Woodhouse is working his way up through the order. That's why Jason Timms has worked his way up through the order. But the race win will go the way in the penultimate round of the Monoposto Championship. Chris Davidson claims the win. In second place is going to be Chris Woodhouse. Third place to Dan Gore, who started from pole position, but that's still a win for him in the Mono 1000 class. The Leastone of O'Brien, Carl O'Brien, finishes in 5th position. Jason Timms finishes in 6th place. And what's going to happen for 7th place? Because Simon Tate and Neil Harrison were still squabbling over it. It's Neil Harrison that has unpicked Simon Tate on the final lap. So Neil Harrison, number 10, comes through to complete the top 6. Simon Tate, the number 15 car, in 7th place. 8th place will be number 40. Which will be the car of Chris Baldwin. 9th place will be 17. That's Bruno Costa. That's a good result from him in the JKS, from 23rd on the grid up to 9th. And Anthony Gauntlet, following his spin, he was running in 5th place, but spin on the penultimate lap, just heading out to the final corner, will dropped him to the bottom of the top 10. So everybody else filing their way over the start-finish line. And we will see these Monoposto racing cars back out on track for their final round of the 2021 Championship later on this afternoon. It's scheduled to be around about 4:15. Last couple of cars to take the checkered flag, just threading their way through. And one of them will include number 98, Rodney Toft, who's been a long-time competitor nowadays in the Monoposto Championship. And I think Darren Richards is the black and the light green car that's just at the tail end of the shot as he comes over to take the checkered flag. And I think that's largely now everybody that has taken the checkered flag. So for Chris Davidson, that for him is another win. And in terms of the Mono F3 Championship, he has missed a few races and had a bit of bad luck along the way, so he's not in the hunt to claim the overall Mono F3 Championship, but he will be delighted with grabbing a win, and that is as a result of the other win he took yesterday. That is the first time he's had back-to-back victories in the Mono F3 category this season, and that now means that it's 4 class wins for him for the 2021 Championship season, so he'll be chuffed with that over the course of this weekend. Chris, who used to race Westfields a good number of years ago and has been heavily involved with tyre development over the years, used to spend a lot of time plodding around racetracks in various supercars, just doing tyre testing for numerous car manufacturers, both within the UK and in particular he spent a lot of time in Europe doing that as well, tyre development. So into the pit lane now come. Just confirm the results for you. Number 31, Chris Davidson, having claimed the win. And in second place, it was Chris Woodhouse. Third place goes the way of Dan Gore, but he is the first car home in the Mono 1000 class, whereas the two ahead are all in Mono F3. And fourth place goes the way of Carl O'Brien. Fifth place was Jason Timms. He won Mono 1400. Sixth place was Neil Harrison. Seventh place from Simon Tate. And eighth place goes the way of the number 40 car of Chris Baldwin. And in ninth place, that's where we see Bruno Costa, and completing the top 10 was Anthony Gauntlet at the wheel of his Jedi. 11th place is going to be Bryn Tootle. He was the winner of the Mono 2000 class. James Lederman finished in 12th place, ahead of 13th place Nigel Davis, and 14th place, which was the number 71 car that had a few problems in the hands of Declan Wright along the way. James Tanser was 15th, ahead of James Rimmer in 16th, with Terry Clark in 17th position, and 18th place was Russ Giles, ahead of Lee Fern, who was only 19th in that race. Newman was there in 20th place, and Morgan McCourt completing the top 21. Outside of the top 21 in 22nd position was Martin Wright. Juan Moreno finished in 23rd. Will McAteer in 24th place would have taken the Mono Classic class by the look of things. Jared Wood was 25th. Chris Levy 26th, and then in 27th position, that was the number 56 car of Tom Wheatley. 28th was Phil Davis after his spin. 29th was Mike Hatton. Rodney Toft was 30th, and I think Darren Richards was the last of the cars over the start-finish line in what was 32nd position. Peter Whitmore was there in 32nd place. Then it was Jeff Fern with problems before we saw Davy Jones, Miles Castledini, and also Sam Don all running into problems over the course of that penultimate race of the season for the Monoposto Championship. So we will see the Monoposto cars back out later on here at Donington Park. That will be around about 4:15 this afternoon. So from everybody here for the moment, at least, it's goodbye.